Okay, we're live. I'm Christopher Robert Stum. Wes Duncan, you guys, welcome aboard. For those of you watching retroactively, this is a live interactive discourse, I would say. So, our next airing is this Friday, the 9th of April at approximately 3 o'clock p.m. Eastern time. If you want to join in and, participate, we're happy to have you on. Come aboard. This is Andy, our first host. Andy, why don't you just introduce yourself for those who don't know you that well?
Sure. My name is Andy Hall. You may not know me, but you probably know my work. Probably on Facebook, maybe on YouTube. I blog over at Pathos. Pathos is a family of blogs, many religious blogs. I write on the non-religious channel. I write a satirical little blog called Laughing in Disbelief. So it's just fun, satirical stuff. I also do a YouTube channel of the same name, Laughing in Disbelief. On there, I do the best advice ever, where awesome people come on and give the best advice they ever received. Besides that, I'm on the Daily Atheist Morning Show as co-host on Tuesdays. And, blah, blah, blah. I'm sure I'll be mentioning some other wonderful things I do over the next, I don't know, however long you guys tolerate me for. So however long that is, I'll just throw in plugs.
I'm remiss to tell you that some of the best advice you could have received was not to come on this show.
Right.
That could have been an entire episode,
The life lesson learned, my friend.
So why don't we dive into it? It's an interesting question that you've posed for the topic. Are atheists digging their own grave? You want to unpack that a little?
Sure. Every once in a while, you'll see on the interwebs a piece of research from Pew. I believe it's Pew. And it says or states about how religious life, how people who are religious in America, the demographics are getting smaller and smaller for them. And the nuns, those of us who don't claim any religious affiliation, is growing larger and larger. And hey, Daily Atheist, I have to say
Daily Atheist, welcome aboard.
Chris Mallard. So when I see this, I start grinding my teeth, not because of the research itself, right? But because of many reactions by fellow atheists who say that this is great, this is fantastic. And then, can I swear on this show?
Yeah.
Okay. So I think there's a bit from Pulp Fiction where the wolf says, let's not start sucking our dicks just yet. And whenever this piece of research comes out, and correct me if I'm wrong, there's this whole hooray, we're winning, and we're practically won. We practically won here in the States. And it just kind of grinds on my nerves quite a bit because that is clearly not the case.
No, indeed. There's been some very strange movements towards not winning happening in recent times.
But also, let us ask a few questions. So what do we mean by win? And what is more, so like further specificity, like in the dimension, right? The amount, if metrization is possible, but I think also important, shall we say a subset of the population may, if and when, such a finding comes out, vocalize their perspectives. And is that subset a vocal minority? That's to say, is it a Pareto distribution whereby those who do the most make up the smallest percentage composition?
Well, what's interesting is that when you're talking about causes and effects, politically speaking, those small groups who are loud,
get a lot of the
funded, take over major policy.
Yep. Because I can say that this has happened in Australia. We have a very strong agnostic, atheist kind of leaning over here, and yet there's a thing called the ACL, the Australian Christian Lobby. And they've managed to get quite a bit of power despite really not having a huge base.
But guys, you have to be careful here.
Money.
Because for any cause and effect relation, number one, it needs to be made clear, like even in theoretical physics, we don't really have a well-defined idea of what causation means. But let us suffice to say, for any effect, it's not that there's one and only one cause. There's at least one cause.
Okay, so let's say there's a very high correlation between well-funded groups, whether you're talking about the Bolsheviks in Russia in 1917 or you're talking about the theocrats in Iran during the revolution, or the Jacobins in France during one of their revolutions, that well-funded, small, vocal groups have a tendency of steering or taking over political bodies.
Or at least very, if not taking over entirely, at least having a huge influence, an unnecessary.
They are a factor. Yeah. And they are a significant statistical factor. When I say I don't know, I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm saying
right. Oh, no. And I respect that too, because if we're going to go into the larger picture about what causation is, I don't know. I read something about David Hume saying that there's no such thing as causation whatsoever, and there's nothing but constant conjunction. Is that the proper term? I don't even know. I'm trying to pull
logical implication satisfied across time. So you can define a conditional, like P implies Q, and then define like a metrized Cauchy space and satisfy a sequence of conditionals across a period of time, but it's not really well defined. There are a lot of problems when you get into the quantum mechanical implications, because it implies like a singular ontology of the universe, whereas state vectors may or may not contest that. It's complicated. It's a direction that if we go there, we're going to be having a discussion about
it's going to be
mathematics and theoretical physics.
Right. Yeah. So what I'm saying is that there's a high correlation between.
I will concede. Yeah, it is a correlation that is statistically significant. Yeah. I would be content in probably conceding that point. Yes.
So what I hear and what I observe is when this research comes out, and like I said, the story comes out every once in a while. It gets reincarnated into the internet every once in a while, and what it does is that it creates this complacency on atheist side or nuns. And what it does is that the other side, the religious right, they are always working and hustling, working to undermine every aspect of American life.
You say a lot of things about them, but you got to give them points for being vigilant.
Yes, and you know what? There's different reasons for that here in the States too, because blue states are typically richer, more educated, healthier, so we are less agitated, basically. Northerners are typically, or not just Northerners, but blue state people, especially progressives, are just less agitated than our red state kin.
What do you mean by undermine every? You don't mean literally every, right? You're meaning a subset.
Right, exactly. So when you talk about,
could you give an example?
Religious groups infiltrating the military or police forces. The levers. So when you're looking to create large, hello. Did you take the
sorry to interrupt you.
Oh, no, that's okay. I have no idea what the Darth Dawkins quiz is, by the way. I have no idea what that is. But when you're talking about what matters to take over or to undermine institutions, you're talking about the judiciary. You're talking about rigging the system so that voter suppression, let's say, or you're talking about infiltrating, like I said, the paramilitary forces, the military forces, stuff like that.
I mean, they've got like a playbook to sort of go by, because the KKK have been doing that for a long time, and that they've been trying to infiltrate groups like that ways.
So here's my question. The concern is really we have a potential subset of individuals who we believe there's sufficient inductive evidence that is a minimal, significant correlation. And when we say minimal, we're not saying it's necessarily minimal. We're saying there is at least this correlation coefficient. We're not saying it's meaning we're choosing a minimum for our estimate of what epsilon the correlation coefficient would be, right? And we're saying maybe these people are insufficient for making particular decisions insofar as their competence or even motives. Is that fair?
Sure.
Is that the concern? So my next question is it just, because I think religiosity is a potential concern, but is it just religiosity, which isn't what you've said, by the way. I'm not trying to say you said this, but is it just religiosity that we should be concerned with insofar as like competence and motive are concerned?
Well, religiosity is what gets the midbrain voters going in elections. And so that is really, when you're talking about levers of controlling and seizing power, religiosity is pretty important, because no one's going to, typically everyday voters aren't going to go, yay, oligarchs. we're going to go oligarch. It has to be mixed into this kind of mythical tale that gets you agitated and gets you going to the polls.
So here's my question. Do you think the typical voter changes with time?
So what do you mean by that?
Meaning, do you think the claim that people may or may not prefer something is a question of like whatever subset of the population is looking for, like the supply and demand curves that may be predictive of what people vote for? It wouldn't occur to one that you could model voting accordingly, but actually you can use economical models to predict voting trends.
See, now this is interesting, because I would say, and this is just anecdotal evidence from what I've seen.
That's fair. That's fair.
That people will vote against their economic self-interest because.
Let us say they can.
Okay, but I would say that. Okay, so let's dig into this a bit more. If I am voting for policies or for politicians that support not universal health care, or let's say making the country more indebted over time because we want tax cuts to oligarchs. If we're voting for people to disembowel unions and the public education system, then I would say possibly that those voters are voting against their own self-interests. Because let's face it, most people aren't billionaires here in the States.
Well, since you said possibly, I mean, it's a fair claim because it implies that there may or may not exist counterexamples. So I think it's fair.
Sure. So I would say that the people vote on tribe. Excuse me. I got something in my throat. But I would say that people vote on tribe more or less. That tribe trumps economics. I'm sorry if there's a pun there somewhere. That people will vote on tribe more than economic self-interest.
I don't know, because the sets are not mutually exclusive, right? In some instances, for example, consider, if you will, that people literally pass legislature for their, if they can, economic self-interest. So then the question is flipped on its head: is what subset of the population, right? In some instances, so it's difficult. It's difficult. It's not that what you're saying isn't potentially substantive. It's just that it's a question of circumstance, you know. It's difficult to extrapolate a Go ahead, Duncan.
Well, I see. I'd be inclined to agree that there is some people who do vote against their own self-interest, but it's actually kind of hard to be 100% sure, because were they actually informed enough to actually know that these Trump supporters, are they aware that all these tax breaks are going to the rich, or are they just being told something else and they believe something else and they actually think they're voting in their self-interest, but they're not? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Well said, Michael Williams. That's what I was thinking exactly, was what they perceive to be their self-interest, whether economic or whatever. If they're religious, they may vote for that reason and not necessarily for economic or whatever, you know.
Just to get back to my earlier point about religiosity, people are more likely to be flim-flammed, not to do the research and not to look at the right data or good data when their midbrains are telling them these toxic fairy tales and saying, well, we got to support these toxic fairy tales.
I don't know enough about neuroanatomy to question like what part of the brain, but let us say some portion or portions of the brain are associated with the activity. But the thing that I find interesting about Michael Williams's conjecture here is it may also be worrisome in that people may just be insufficiently competent, right? In other words, it may be that, you know, it's really a question like foundational to economics and game theoretic models is, what if the information isn't perfect? You know, to what extent can people discern a particular outcome and the factors pertinent to that outcome?
You know, it's interesting because usually I'm the negative one in any conversation.
Oh man,
I'm going to make actually a positive statement, like a puppy dogs and rainbows statement. I'm going to say, given basic information, right? The average person here in the States would be able to say, wow, I guess I'm fucking myself when I vote Republican.
That's not a good example to me.
If they weren't plugged into Fox News.
Yeah.
So what do you mean? What do you mean by Republican? Do you think all Republicans think the same thing?
I think that definitely. Well, no. I mean, for some oligarchs, of course, it makes perfect sense to.
Do you think that any position taken by a Republican must therefore be wrong? Is it enough that they're Republican?
Because what's funny about tribalism, and you guys have been around enough to see enough elections and presidents to see that there are parts in W's, right? George the Bush the younger presidency that guy couldn't do anything right.
I don't know. It seemed he got elected.
I mean, it seemed right. But I'm saying is that if you're talking to Democrats, there was nothing that guy could do right.
But that doesn't mean it's true necessarily.
He did do something right.
Perception, yeah.
And there are some things, and this will grate onto some Democrats, that there are things that Trump does and did somewhat competently.
I'm not entirely sure they weren't accidental, but yes, some of those things did happen occasionally.
Sure. Yeah.
It's difficult to see the inside of a house through a keyhole, and when you talk about sets of people,
So what I'm saying is that if you just looked and just broke down basic Republican policy about, gosh, let's talk about, just take one topic, which is pertinent right now, and that's about employer-funded health care, right? So Republicans, by and large, want employer-funded health care here in the States. I think it's about 1/3 or maybe a half of all Americans have employer-funded health care, while Democrats have been shown to be more towards government-funded health care, or at least universal health care in one form, whether you're talking about the ACA or whether you talk about Sanders' Medicare for All. I would propose, and this would be a great experiment to tell you the truth, because the proof would be in the tasting of the pudding. If you got like 100 voters and put them into different groups and just showed them the basic math, or what happens when you have quote unquote universal health care, I think most people would go, dang, to use a technical term, dang.
Bold of you to say this to a mathematician. Because I can tell you that the mathematics for advanced economics, especially for a question of this enormity, is complex, and that it needs at least multivariable calculus. So I'm not sure what you mean by the basic math.
Well, it's like, okay, so for an example, how much are you going to save by having everyone covered as against to everyone having basic primary health care, as against to people going into emergency rooms and cranking up emergency room costs because they can't afford a doctor? That seems like a pretty black and white issue right there.
No, because I think you're assuming
people able to get preventative care, that as against to exercising emergency care that hospitals have to do. Absolutely. You're saving money.
I think the problem is you're kind of assuming that the reason that the cost is what it is and why people can't afford it.
What I said was that was an aspect of it, of how you would save money with universal health care.
Sure, but now that the claim is an aspect, it's not quite as strong an appeal now, is it? And I'm not saying I necessarily disagree with you, but I'm pointing out that
my appeal is quite strong. Thank you very much.
All right, so do you want to actually pull up the screen share and we can discuss the arithmetic, or shall we discuss something pertinent to atheism? Because we can go either way. It's up to you.
We can talk about atheism.
Because we can't.
Basically, what happens, and my point, because I'm sorry, what's that?
Let's talk some secular stuff.
Okay, let's talk.
And try to focus more on the group things, I think, is what you were mainly talking about, Andy.
Michael has a point. I think Michael has a point, though.
And the Democratic groupthink.
Yeah,
not necessarily Democrats and Republicans, but the groupthink that goes along with it, I think, is more where you were coming from.
Well,
am I correct?
Yeah. Well, yeah. That's part of what I'm saying, and there are definitely ways of helping to insulate groups from groupthink.
Yeah.
I think that's in the
literature. There's a lot of misinformation
I think
too that I like to maybe discuss too.
What was that?
Some of that. I think there's a lot of misinformation that gets brought into groupthinks and such that is important to note too.
Like what particular?
No, it's not that. We're just asking questions.
Well,
just wait and see, because other people's points. I'm happy to question theirs as well. For example, I would conjecture that I don't think you have a sufficient basis to draw such a conclusion. And it's also not true that literally anything Andy said, because then I would literally have to contradict things I literally a few moments ago I believe disagreed with or conceded.
Chris has been very gracious about saying that he's wrong about stuff. So give Chris.
It's actually harder than people think to make coherent, concise statements.
Yeah, and before
there's a lot of disingenuous statements out there.
Andy actually said something where he actually put a possibility in. He put possibility in there, and it made it so that the statement was actually more logically sound because it wasn't an absolute. And Chris actually said that was good because you put the possibility in there. I can't.
Yeah. We didn't dismiss the point, and it's also not correct to describe what I did as you said, a refutation per se, as much as a refinement, perhaps, right? Because what we did was we kind of tried to concretize the claim and see what we could infer from the intuition. Because I don't think he's claiming that he's coming here with well thought out certain knowledge as much as conjectures that we could discuss.
Yeah. Oh, and speaking of actually what you came here to discuss, I will tie it in with the whole thing that we were talking about with the groupthink before. Your actual topic is actually a bit about the groupthink, because when you were saying before about when the atheists get those results saying that the atheism is starting to win, they start becoming all sort of kind of like, closer together and sort of tribalized sort of things, and then like, we got this sort of things. And then people slip under the radar and do stuff that we really wish to have.
Let me say this about this whole groupthink thing is that there's a failure of leadership too, amongst quote unquote whatever atheist leaders there are, about pointing out that this is not what you think this is. This is not the idea that you can be complacent. This is not necessarily. I mean, it's okay news, but it's not like fantastic news. Yeah, I'd say it's one of the things that keeps this groupthink dynamic going is the fact that the leaders aren't challenging it. They just post the article, go rah rah, this is great for our team. When people should be saying that there are wolves at the door, and we should be doing something about those wolves, as against just like waving pom poms around, going "Yay team."
Well, here's my question, okay? Because I'd like to bring it back in because I feel like and it may be because I'm not a good host here, but I'd like to bring it back to the question of like, are atheists digging their own graves, and kind of, do you think you could extrapolate on what you mean by winning?
Well, I mean, winning is not. So we could talk about losing. We could talk about definitely what losing looks like. Losing looks like.
What's the negation of winning, isn't it?
Well, we could talk about real world. What real world looks
Actually,
like.
I'm sorry, that's not correct. That's not correct. The negation of winning includes things outside the set of just losing. So never mind. If you're not winning, you could be walking. So it's not true that the negation is just losing.
Okay, so we could talk about the worst case scenario, or one of the worst case scenario, which is us ending up like a Christian version of Iran, or a Christianized version of Pakistan. And now I know that Pakistan and Iran are two different countries with two different sets of governments, and let's face it, what the Christian right wants in this country is for us to be a Christian version of Iran.
Yep.
And that is not winning. And that is the way that that is the road that we are on.
Do all Christians want that though?
Absolutely not, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if that's what they all want. A significant minority of them want that, and they will herd the others to vote that way.
I don't see how that follows.
That is completely true. It is completely true. Because
if it's so inassailable,
all those Christians are giving certain people who are in charge money.
I hear what you're saying, Andy.
Let me continue. And those people direct the message.
But if it's so inassailable, why won't you let me explain why I disagree? Perhaps.
Well, because I needed to clarify myself. That's fine.
All right, go ahead.
I just did. You can go ahead.
So here's my question for you, okay? If there are some Christians that may not think this way, would they not vote against and possibly raise their own funding? Or is all the money only behind those who have this?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Because we just
absolutely.
Absolutely. Okay. Probably, possibly, maybe not.
Well, that doesn't sound a strong claim now.
Possibly, but pragmatically, what matters is that these liberal Christians, right? They are not as energized as red meat Christians. They are just not as motivated. They're not as, and they do not put up the fight. They do not put up the fight as much as the other side does.
Michael, are you
and
Christian?
So
are you a Christian, Michael? I'm interested. I mean, let's see. Well, I'd say you're a little bit biased, to be honest.
You know, the Christian right isn't monolithic, but just like the communists weren't as monolithic in 1917, 1905, whatever. The Bolsheviks were only a small group within the Communist Party. You had Mensheviks, you had SRs, but they took over because they were the most motivated and funded group.
Okay, I have my day. So does that mean you're like a Christian in conflict? Or rather, shall we say you just believe some axioms of belief? At least a deist.
Right.
Okay. I mean, doesn't this, right. So it's, I guess my question is this, like when we classify people as religious, so what about Michael? Is Michael, how would you fit people? So here's the difficulty. It's difficult to know the statistics because if statistics was as easy as looking up a figure, okay, you wouldn't need a PhD as a statistician. I can tell you many instances where I see people.
We're not talking about whether or not your degree means anything, Chris. We fully.
That's not my degree. That's not my degree. My degree is in statistics. Right, but my degree is in statistics. The reason I'm bringing it up is I'm pointing out that you cannot infer statistics by just literally looking at a figure. It's not that simple. It's very complicated. You have to look at the mathematics behind it. Okay, and because of that, it's very difficult to think about how a given body of data from a population set actually informs a particular conclusion.
However, can I just
Christian in conflict, I suppose. So doesn't this seem a counterexample? Like this guy. So William, Michael or William, which do you prefer?
So
would you be against a person trying to take full control over the government and galvanize it towards a particular Christian ideal?
Michael Williams is not the person that we're talking about. He is not indicative of. He is not an example of that demographic. He's obviously a liberal Christian, and to tell you the truth, I'm going to guess overall.
Let's let him answer the question.
No, but I just stated a little while ago that liberal
you started with a universally quantified
let me finish. Is that liberal Christians, more or less, probably most of the time, aren't going to be as motivated as their red meat guzzling fundamentalist.
Do they eat red meat?
It's a metaphor. We all understand what metaphors are.
I don't know. I don't know. You know, I think it seems on its face, you know, a convincing claim, but I'm telling you, it's probably way more complicated than that. And I'm asking, so what I'm saying is this, okay? Michael's relevant because for a universally quantified claim, right, you need only a single counterexample. And what I'm pointing out is since you've walked that down to an existentially quantified claim, if we can ask Michael some information, we at least have at least one instance of perhaps a person who, you know, now is that saying that your existentially quantified claim is worthless? No, I'm not saying that. And I'm not even saying I disagree with you fully. I'm just trying to have an honest dialogue here that's not biased in a particular direction. Yeah. I'm trying to do genuine reasoning, which is not the same as assuming a conclusion and pretending to get there through, you know, just taking random axioms and assuming they fit together. That's not genuine reasoning. I would be horrified. To be fair, I'm not representative of the demographic. Fair enough.
But so I was right.
No, because what is the demographic? We don't know. I don't know.
The thing is, I've got a bit of experience from having like debated quite a bit on religious pages, and I'm not saying what I'm saying is definitive at all or anything, but I have seen that the religious people tend to have more of a organized, structured. They even have like talking points that they sort of disseminate amongst each other and stuff like that. They do seem to have an organization level that us atheists are not comparing on that same level, because we are sort of like cats that are being herded occasionally, and you know we have ideas that are similar in where we want to go, but we don't actually get together and focus and organize quite to that same extent, it seems.
Right, and I would say that's a problem with leadership, Duncan, to tell you the truth, is that there should be more talking and more about points. One of the Westbrook, I forget his name, Thomas Westbrook, who does the Holy Kool-Aid channel, he runs the Faithless Forum, which is a conference out in Texas. I think it's coming up in June if it isn't canceled. But what they're trying to do there, trying to get YouTube atheists together, and he would not agree with my ideas about weaponizing them, or he would at least help them get better at being atheists on YouTube. And I think
I'm interested in something. Duncan has risen a good point, and it's I stopped here because I think it's pertinent to what you just said. Duncan, do you actually want to bring up that point here? Because we're about actually genuinely inquiring. And if you want, I can pull you up on the stream right now and you can talk out your point. I'd like to hear what you had to say, because I'm actually interested in your question.
About how, oh, sorry. You got the same.
Darth Dawkins. Darth Dawkins, do you want to come aboard? I'll drop you a link. You can decide. Here's the link to the conversation. Continue, of course. I'm just, I'm interested in what he has to say.
Okay.
All right, come aboard. Just click the link and it should prompt you into the conversation. Ask us your question. Let's see how we can handle this.
Oh, dear.
You know, because I'm interested in a genuine dialogue. Yeah, it's right above you. There he is. Okay.
Hi.
Welcome aboard, sir. What's your question?
I was referring to the questions that I asked on the Daily Atheist Show, which they frequently moralized on the show, and I would post questions saying, on what objective grounds do they have for any type of moralizing? I would ask questions like that, and it was non-trolling, it was legitimate questions germane to the subject, and he just blocked me.
These are difficult questions, and they're good questions.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to deep dive into the whole morality thing, and that was one of the topics that I was going to mention to Chris at some point. In fact, it actually, you sort of spoiled a surprise there for me. But anyways, continue.
So by the way, that's real quick. By the way, that's not unique to the Daily Atheist Show. It's pretty common among almost all of the YouTube atheist shows. They're just atheist ghettos where they just pat each other on the back.
Yeah. Well, I hope you can see that I'm being more fair here. I'm not interested in. I don't know. Well, you know,
I don't even know where you guys are coming from. I just saw the show and I was.
That's great. Welcome aboard then, I think.
I don't know if you're theists, atheist, or what. I
don't know. So functionally, I think I'm atheist, right? I'm a mathematician, logician in theoretical physics in the works. And I can't logically, as far as I'm aware, disprove the existence of a God. But I also, I don't think I operate from a position of belief, but then again, there may be implicit contradictions in that very claim that I'm not aware of, you know, because I specialize in logic.
Well, that's a good point.
And I noticed that many people think that they're arguing rigorously, but if they haven't been trained in formal logic, they actually have no inkling what real rigor looks like, you know?
That's a good point. It's a common belief that you can be neutral about God, right? But unfortunately, that's a category error. We can be neutral about many things, but there are some things, such as transcendental necessity, that you can't be neutral about. So when atheists on the internet say, oh, we lack belief in God, or atheism is simply the rejection of a God claim, they're conceiving of God as some unimaginably powerful hall monitor of the universe. Well, you could be neutral towards such a creature, even if it's supreme.
Let's say a subset. You know,
Matt, can I just finish? Can I finish? Let me just finish because I didn't get to the point. But when you lack belief in God as creator, where God is ultimate, absolute, and institutes all possibility, then if you lack belief in that, then whatever else you say is derived from its negation, right? So you can't be neutral about God in terms of the creator-creation distinction.
Well, all right, so let's unpack that. I can tell that you're new to logic. You're thinking in terms of classical logic, okay? Now, I'm going to let's unpack this, because this is my specialty. So consider, let A be a set. Are you familiar with sets? Basics? Axiomatic set theory?
Yeah, but when you talk about other entities and sets, they don't apply to God, because God's in a completely different category.
That's a category, though. Is that not a set by definition?
God is not a set.
He's not a set, but he's in a completely different category. Do you think there's a possible contradiction?
The category, you might want to say attribute. God is what is ultimate. What is ultimate is not a set.
Is it setless?
Is it setless?
Empty set.
Well, you might want to abstract it, but it's not a concrete set.
So here's my question: if God is not a thing that you can pinpoint, so if I call something a glug and say it's setless, how have I distinguished that from God? How have you referred clearly to the thing that you claim to define?
Well, God would be in the category of what is ultimate.
Right, but are there not, for example, the notion of ultimate in itself, right? The principle of ultimate. It doesn't, how do you know you're not just referring to that principle, if existent?
Well, I see the concept of what is ultimate as synonymous with God.
Right, but then a concept is a being.
Yeah, we have analogs about God.
Okay,
right?
so what's ultimate?
What does ultimate means? Whatever it is that is eternal, absolute, and institutes all possibility.
All possibility, including the
all
possibility.
No, that would be self-refuting.
Right. So it can't be everything then.
No, you can't hold to the falsity of God. It's self-refuting.
Right. So it can't institute all possibility then, is what I'm saying, right? Because that would be self-defeating. If you're using
when I say possibility, I'm not talking about imagined states. I'm talking about what actually is, can be, and what cannot be.
But can you refer to such things without imagining them?
Can I refer to them without imagining them? You mean conceiving them? No.
Or just, it's so how exactly have you demonstrated that these aren't like, see, it seems to me that it's very interesting. I don't see any, and I find it interesting you didn't let me actually dive into the logic that you're relying on. You're relying on logical structures, actually, that I was going to show you are not as sound as you think. But it seems that you're more interested in steering the conversation towards a particular direction. I don't think you're genuinely trying to speak a...
Do you think God can be spoken of and referenced just like any other non-ultimate entity?
I don't know.
Okay, well, that's my point. Okay, so your position is, okay, do you assert that God is the necessary precondition of all facts?
Where did that come from?
Well, I'm trying to clarify your position. Do you assert that God is the necessary precondition of all facts?
What do you think?
Well, I'm asking you, so we can have clarity.
No, that seems very absurd. Okay. Let S be the set of all facts. Take the power set. Then by Cantor's theorem, there is no onto function between S and its power set.
Okay. So do you? Well, that's just what you just said to me is white noise because it's not really germane. I asked you, do you assert that God is the necessary precondition of all facts, all temporal dependent facts?
Okay.
Well, not all facts depend on time, do they?
Okay. Do you believe that God is the necessary prerequisite for all things that begin?
That for all things that begin? So if you say that, though, sometimes for any effect, not that cause and effect is well defined, there's at least one cause, but not one and only one cause, right?
Yeah, I'm not getting. See, what you're typically doing is I'm getting the evasive double talk. I asked you.
What I'm doing is correcting your logic because
I asked you a question. Do you believe?
Might be a little bit over.
Do you believe that there is something that is ultimate and absolute that is the basis of all things, all contingencies?
I don't know.
Okay. Right. So then the answer is you would not assert that God is the necessary precondition.
I don't know. That's not equivalent to that.
I didn't ask you if you know. I said, do you assert it?
If you're asking me if I assert it, you're asking me what I think. You're asking me if I'm a rational person, if I can deduce.
No,
right?
Are you willing to assert? So you're unwilling to assert that God is the necessary precondition of all.
I don't know. I don't know. No, you don't know. You don't know. I'm asserting something. It's a claim about my own state, right?
See, what you're doing is you're baiting and switching here. All I asked you was, are you willing to assert? Do you assert? Will you assert that God is the necessary precondition? Either you're willing or you're not willing.
Or I don't know because I'd like to.
No, I didn't ask you. I didn't ask you if you know. So you keep on switching. You're answering a question I didn't ask.
May I ask you a question real quick?
Yeah, but I'd like an answer to my question. Are you willing now to assert?
I want to quickly unpack the underlying logic to show you that you're acting like there's only two truth conditions when that's not necessarily.
I'm still waiting for an answer to my question.
So here's what I'm going to do, Duncan. I'm gonna keep you in the chat, but I'm going to take you on mute for a minute so I can explain something to you. I want you to listen to me because I don't think you're listening to me.
Well, then when I again,
I think you're talking at me, but you're not listening to me.
No, I asked you a question and you're being evasive.
That's a possible interpretation. Okay.
It's self-evident.
That's according to you.
I never thought I'd hear self-evident used as a slur before, but I guess there's a first time for everything, guys.
But here's what we're going to
do. Your response is very typical of the overwhelming majority of atheists that I encounter on the internet. They just evade. I asked you a simple question. Are you willing? Will you
yeah,
assert that God is the necessary precondition of all temporal facts?
Right. But you can't ask someone a question that assumes your conclusion and then be
Okay.
surprised when
Now,
they're not sure how to proceed.
See, you're wasting my time here. You're being evasive.
How are you wasting? How is Chris wasting your time when you're on our show? How is this possible?
Because
this
he invited
is a free
me on.
advertisement for your crappy atheist channel or whatever channel you're doing.
I don't have any channel.
This is just hijacking. Whatever you're doing is that
I'm
you're
not
just
hijacking
this
anything.
show and just
I'm not
you're
hijacking
ego
anything.
masturbating. That's what you're doing. And Chris,
I'm not
wasting your
hijacking
time because your time isn't worth anything, obviously. Because this
All right. So here's what I think we'll do. He raised some interesting questions. I want to actually unpack the logic really quick. Because it seems what he's relying on is a logical structure that is classical and it has a binary truth value system. It is for any proposition, there is either a true or false value defined, right? But if you learn what's called fuzzy logic, which is a new set, there's ternary logic where you define any value. Okay, so it's not, you don't necessarily have to accept or refute a truth value. So on a truth value table, right, you take every proposition, and for every proposition, there is a TF, and you take the permuted table, the sample space of possibilities. That's in the classical system, right? So A and B is true if and only if both A and B is true. If you take a ternary system where you have an indeterminate truth value, now it's not as simple. Now there's an I for any proposition where I is the indeterminacy. Because it turns out you can prove with some discrete systems of logic that there will always exist for any discrete system at least one boundary proposition, which is neither provable nor disprovable by the system. It's Gödel's first and second incompleteness theorems. So there's an indeterminacy truth value that now the conjunction may or may not be. It's an indeterminacy in truth value. But furthermore, if you take fuzzy logic, then take a set of elements, x1, x2, da 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 da, and for any x sub I in the set, define an epsilon sub I, whose value ranges between 0 and 1 inclusive, or just some 0 and k positive. It's arbitrary, and let this be the degree of membership to the set. And you can kind of you can conceptualize the degree of membership as, shall we say, the probability it's true, or the extent to which a thing pseudo belongs in the set. And now things are more complicated, you see, because let's say I have a set and all of whose elements are, their degree of membership is 1/2, right? You can actually, with fuzzy logic, demonstrate the existence of objects that can't be fully said to exist wholly in or out of a set. You can't think of in or out as just a binary construct in the case of these abstract things. And if you take a set S, all of whose elements have 1/2 the degree of membership, take the complement, right? Then the degree of membership, if you define K to be 1, it's just 1 minus 1/2, which is 1/2, right? But then here's something really weird. S and its complement are actually, in this case, logically indiscernible, right? And their intersection is therefore non-empty. Now, if you set the degree of membership back to 1 or 0, this goes away, right? You get back to classical logic. But the point I'm making is far more complicated and deep than people realize. And when they make inferences, they're relying on a structure to make those inferences. For example, he's giving us a conjunction of what he believes are sound propositions that he is then trying to infer a consequent from, I assume, if he's being rational. But that, of course, presupposes the veracity, and that's also equally applicable to our own claims if we're thinking just in terms of classical logic. But we're relying on that structure of that conditional. And so what my research is in mathematics is actually attempting a proof of all proofs while conceding that Gödel's theorem is correct. Okay, so the idea is...
Okay, wait a minute. Let me just ask a stupid question.
Yeah.
So you're saying that there's a proof of all proofs?
No. I'm trying to see if it's possible. I don't know.
Okay,
Maybe
you're trying to see if it's possible.
That's what I hope my dissertation to be. The idea is we can't do it through a discrete system.
Let me ask you another question, and I'm trying to think about what you're saying. The proof of all proofs, and I know this is going to sound like I'm making a joke out of this, and maybe I am. It's fuzzy?
Right. So by that, you're asking, would you use a system of fuzzy logic, right?
Yeah.
Well, here's the problem. This is not so much to do, and by the way, William's comment, I think, is a remark to Duncan's statements. Is that correct? I'm sorry, Michael. Is that correct, Michael? But so here's the idea. Independent of the metaphysical things you try to refer to, if you're using a discrete system, right, in written form, like this is a symbol, right? All these are symbols, and they're discrete in that you can count them. And right. So it turns out that the very discreteness of the language actually prevents you from proving things about the metaphysical things, if existent, that you try to reference.
So you're saying the stuff that you can represent cannot represent the things that don't exist.
Let's dive into this. All right, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to do a screen share really quick.
Just
real quick.
I'm stumbling. I'm stumbling.
All right, so screen share, application window, paint.
Don't feel bad.
You guys see this?
We all are.
You guys see this?
I said you're sounding very well, Andy, if that helps.
Okay.
Okay, so for any x sub nth symbol, because there may be, any number of them, let's associate with this a positive integer n, right?
Gotcha.
So for example, if my symbol was a, let's just encode this as the number 1. Okay, now if we want the actual proof of this, Gödel's incompleteness theorem, it's going to be long, so I'm going to give you an analogy. It needs to be understood this is not correct, okay? But this will help you make intuitive what's going on here, okay? So here's what we're going to do. For any, now I'm going to use a different symbol. Let's just go back to this paintbrush, maybe this, and let's make the size here. Okay, so for any, there we go. For any integer x, there exists a unique prime factorization, p1 to some n1 times p2 to some n2, right? By the fundamental theorem of arithmetic, right? So for example, let me just go back and show you, like 6 is equal to 2 times 3, right?
Right.
And these are each primes raised to the first power, and all the other primes are to the 0th power. So here's what we do. All right, so bear with me. We first encode every discrete symbol with a positive integer. Now then we can imagine taking any discrete string in this language that we define that we could possibly write, right? And it will have an entry in that string. So let's let the ith entry in that string, so meaning here's the first place, the second place in the string, right? This ith entry be the ith prime number. And to identify what goes here, let's put it to the power of n. So p sub I to the power of n will encode the ith entry in the string and its identity. So let's give it a concrete example, and then we'll explain how this is an analogy. This is not the proof. It needs to be understood.
Oh, I understand. Yes.
So 6 equals 2 times 3, okay, to the first. If I let a be if and only if 1, meaning I correlate this with the number 1, then this is the first prime number, and it says, okay, the first string is a, okay? The second entry in the string, it's a. So this number 6 encodes the string AA. Okay, this is how computers work.
Sure.
So they encode things.
Yep.
We'll get to you, Duncan. Okay. I'd like, well, maybe it depends, because we can't really, we don't have time to talk to everyone. I think I gave you a fair shot. So here's the thing. Now that we have this, here's the idea. We can use sets of numbers to actually make inferences about systems of discrete language. So now let's make a table. Okay. And let's imagine we take every possible sentence and proof we could write, and it could be as long as you want, just a table of numbers, okay? Right, it just keeps going on, and you get the idea, right? Just a table of numbers. So here's what we're going to do. Imagine that this is everything you could possibly write with this new defined language. And some of these are syntactically well-defined and have an applicable truth value depending on what system you set up. Notice this before we set up the system, perhaps, right? Now, here's what we're going to do. Each of these numbers has a unique prime factorization. If they're not equal, will represent a unique, shall we say, string or even a proof, right? So imagine these are all axioms in every proof we could write. And now consider this. We're going to do something called diagonalizing. We're going to move diagonally. And so if this is even, make it odd number arbitrarily. If it's even, make it a 1. If it's odd, make it a 2, right? So this is going to be 2, and notice that already if we write this here 1 2, when we get to the next number, it won't be on this list. If this next number moving diagonally is odd, we're going to make it even. Right? So then you will, through this method of diagonalization, you can always produce another number not on this list. And so here's the problem. If we take this list, this table, to be all of our axioms and every proof from those axioms we could ever devise, we can always produce a new string of digits, a new number that can possibly, and in fact you can prove will, encode to a syntactically well-defined string of terms that has a defined truth value, but is not derivable from the axioms.
Yeah. Yep.
And you could try to add this to your axioms, but just do it again, right? And so the problem, this is one of the incompleteness theorems, is that you cannot prove that for any system there will exist at least one boundary proposition, which is neither provable nor disprovable by the system. So let's look at algebra and geometry. In geometry, if you take Euclid's fifth postulate, that for any three lines that intersect in Euclidean plane, if their angle of intersection is less than pi, they should intersect, right? So it seems. So in this picture, meaning this, like if I've got these lines, right, this is less than pi, so these should intersect. It seems an innocuous proof, because obviously if they're both 90 degrees, it seems that they should just go on forever, right? Turns out that Gauss and other mathematicians were able to show that you can neither prove nor disprove this proposition. Euclid's fifth postulate is neither provable nor disprovable with the axioms of geometry. And so because of that, if you accept the fifth postulate, you get what's called E, Euclidean geometry. And if you reject it, you get non-Euclidean, which is like the space of hyperbolic space, spherical space, etc. The point I'm making, okay, and this is what I meant, Eddie, is it's fucking complicated.
Sure.
And so what he's trying to do is not only rely on a structure of logic that I think, we have not axiomatized logic in mathematics. So what I'm trying to do is explore, okay, but there is perhaps, I don't know, a difference between referring to something with a language and the language itself, right? So maybe Gödel's incompleteness theorems are correct, but not statements about ultimate logic. In other words, if we imagine a non-discrete system, a continuous system of logic, which obviously none of this could be because these are all discrete symbols, right? And it's not, I can't show you what that would be because they don't know space is continuous. And continuous technically isn't a term mathematicians really use unless referring to functions right now. We talk about a space being complete, metrized, and like I'd say compact, things like that. But we don't usually but I'm sorry if this has been a rant. I just wanted to clarify why if I'm cautious, it's not because I'm trying to troll people.
Yeah.
It's because I understand.
Like I said, Chris, out of this last hour of conversation, at no point would I think that you're being disingenuous or not dealing in good faith. Yeah.
And even when it came to having Dawkins on before, he was asking a question and Christopher actually said, I don't know, which is a really reasonable answer to a question that when you're trying to think about it, you just wouldn't accept it. I mean, if he had asked me, I would have said, no, I don't believe in it because I don't believe that is the case. I'm not saying that I'm not saying that I believe there is no God, but I'm saying that I don't believe in a God, and therefore I wouldn't be putting him as the value of all things.
Right. I mean, there are so many problems with the way it was phrased. I hope this shows that if I really wanted to unpack what he did and all the things wrong with it, we could spend. But then again, here's the fundamental question. Do we know that that's really a problem? You see, because I'm falling back on a system of logic that I'm relying on that for all I know isn't fully axiomatizable. And so that's why I'm not sure. And that's why my attempt as my dissertation will be to prove the ultimate consistency of all of logic. But the way to do that isn't to refute Gödel's incompleteness theorems. The irony is you have to embrace them. You say, okay, these are true for discrete systems. Now let's define a hypothetical continuous system of logic and see where that takes us. And so that's what my research is about.
Yeah.
Well, there you go.
Yeah. So I hope that clarifies. And Duncan, you're welcome to participate. But I don't know if it's productive to ask people whether they agree with your conclusion or your axiom, and then if they're not sure or they disagree, to say, well, you didn't answer my question, therefore I must be correct. That doesn't even follow. If I say, hey, Duncan, will you affirm that my name is Christopher? And he doesn't say yes or no. That doesn't mean my name is or is not Christopher. It doesn't follow. It's maybe it is, maybe it's not. I don't know. Okay. I don't know.
And if it helps, Christopher, I mean, I know that Chris and Andy have bumped into him before, and so he is sort of a known. I'm not saying he's a problem person or anything like that. I'm just saying he's someone who does like to ask questions and things like that. People will know what's going on there.
I have to tell you, I'm on the Daily Atheist Show on one day, and I don't remember coming across Duncan atheism before. I wanted to talk about Dunkin' Donuts, to tell you the truth, because I'm a big fan of the donuts and of the coffee, to tell you the truth. My girlfriend hates it. She's shaking her nod. She's a Starbucks person. She thinks it's too plebeian, these Dunkin' Donuts things. But I was going to talk to him about like bear claws maybe, or Boston cream donuts, and then we got into this kind of mess. But it is what it is.
I leave it to those who want to watch to infer whether this is true for themselves. Because I'm pretty confident that most people who are sufficiently competent to reason will not conclude this. And I'm happy to. I don't know, because fundamentally I'm relying on a system of logic to make that inference that I don't even know is fully axiomatizable. But the inability to axiotize, even if true, doesn't mean that logic isn't consistent, right? Maybe it just means, for all we know, it could be, and we just can't prove it. And I don't know, So I don't even know what I wish to attempt for my dissertation. If it's possible, I don't know. I would love to see if it were. Go ahead, Duncan.
Yeah. No, I was just saying to his thing about how it went unanswered. I actually just answered it just then. So if he had actually been fully paying attention,
I think each of us answered. He didn't really like the answer, and it didn't conform to his bias, probably.
So you should have said they didn't give the answer we wanted.
Yeah. Well, welcome back. Look at that.
Daily Atheist.
Hey,
Crispy.
Yeah.
I like crispy.
Thank you. Coming back.
Yeah.
Chris.
I hope he was watching my explanation of logic and why he now realizes I'm not trolling Andy. It's fucking complicated.
No, I never got that feeling.
Yep. Yeah, that's good, because as Chris is saying, our mission objective is to sort of be open and honest, motivate questions, and not actually to try and state that we ever know definitive answers for any, because that's just not in my wheelhouse. I can say I don't know a lot, which is good.
Well, welcome back. And by the way, just like Duncan, if you want to come on, we're happy to have you join in the conversation. But It seems you two know each other well, so I think that'd be that's the idea. And I don't know if that was weird, Andy. And I know as a guest, you may not be used to us polling other people.
I have to tell you, is that I was very happy with the diagrams and about the charts.
Good. Whiteboard things.
But you need to understand that was not correct. That's not the proof.
Oh, I understand
it's just to build the intuition.
I understand that. I have a basic understanding, maybe 5% of what you just did, and I carry that with me in life in some useful way. In fact, and I'm making a joke out of it, but I'm serious. I got something out of it.
Yeah, I get it, because I'm in the same boat, Andy. I'm very much this is a learning process. My knowing Christopher is a learning process on itself, and making a channel is also a learning process. But yeah, I very much have your sort of idea of I don't know much, but what I do know, I'll try and use to make sense of more things, and I kind of like that spirit,
Oh, yeah. I got really drunk one night. My girlfriend's here, so I'm going to refer to her. So my girlfriend's much smarter than I am, which doesn't really say a whole lot, but it is what it is. So I got really trashed one night at this Boston area bar that was closing. Yeah, because it was open for 150 years and it was just no longer viable. And what did you explain to me with a cocktail napkin? Binary numbers, which of course, because I'm just a joke person, binary numbers, they were explained to me somewhere in middle school, which I think I was probably sleeping through it. She did this lovely little chart, and this is 6 or 7 or 9. I don't remember how many pints in I was, but I was able to take that, not the napkin itself, but the knowledge. And that's the power of good diagrams.
Well,
yes.
Let's not call it looks like knowledge, but now you see my concern.
Yeah.
The way out of this is not to pretend. Some mathematicians and logicians may not like this, but is not to pretend we have it. I want, if possible, to actually give logicians and mathematicians that robust foundation, something truly as solid as bedrock. But I start to wonder if the very discreteness of our language is the impediment toward.
Well, you know what I find frustrating coming from my background is how it took me until about when I was 40 to figure out, or it was explained to me that math is a process.
I don't know.
More than a combination of facts.
I don't know.
Well, you know what it is? And if it was just a combination of facts, like geography, for an example, you would just have to know certain things, right? And you wouldn't be exploring. I mean, you might be exploring somewhat, but you wouldn't be discovering.
Is there a mathematics? Is there a mathematics to geography?
I would imagine there would be. There's numbers.
So I don't know.
Yeah.
You'll find that's unfortunately a common response of mine, and I'm sorry if it disappoints.
Yeah, that's just going to us.
I don't know even that I don't know.
I think that I say
Sometimes
that
it's-
too, but I
yeah.
think I say it in a different way than you say it.
He
Perhaps.
sounds smart when he says it, doesn't he? I'm
Yeah,
gonna try to
right,
learn that.
right.
I mean, that's the trick, right?
That is.
That's also my stance on
That's what I'm trying
religion.
to learn.
I don't know, and you don't know yet either.
I mean, I don't.
I will say that as I've gotten older, I've gotten more comfortable with my ignorance.
Yeah.
I'm willing-
definitely am.
I'm willing to acknowledge it and move forward. In
Yeah,
ways.
there's gaps in the armor.
Yeah.
Yep, I get that too. Because when I was younger, I was very reluctant to admit that sort of things. But nowadays, I'm fully aware of and happy to admit it, and it allows me to learn easier.
So here's
It
my
does.
question.
It does.
Yeah.
Because it seems to me the dialogue that I attempted with Duncan is a good example for us to perhaps further discuss how atheists or just people in general discussing religion, perhaps maybe that's even a more productive way to frame the discussion. It's just people in general when discussing religion. Maybe now you see Andy why I frame things more generally. It's because there's just so many variables.
I would have, if you were going to talk to people face to face about religion, I think the data shows that not being a dick about it in general is a good idea.
I'm not. I don't think you're talking from personal experience, Dad.
No,
Have you just seen it happen elsewhere or something?
I would conjecture that. I'm not sure. But I wonder, and I'm not sure how could I, because the problem is, did Duncan atheism, did he come on right with the intention to really discuss this, or did he come on, and maybe there are other sets of possibilities too, right? Or did he come on just to try to argue and assume conclusion and pigeonhole me into one of his logical fallacies, right? That
It kind of felt a little bit that way in a way, because he came on and his first question that he asked was about how can you judge things if you don't have a, like, it's a very standard question that I see from people on that side. If you're an atheist, therefore you don't have any objective standard to be able to do things. But then he moved straight on from that onto another question.
Yeah.
So I thought if he was fully genuine, wouldn't he have stuck with that first question, which was a really good question?
Right.
And I was actually looking to deep dive in.
I'm actually working to axiomatize the theory of ethics, and it's actually one of the best theories I've actually encountered. I'm not yet publishing it because I want it to be sufficiently robust, but it's not quite utilitarianism. It's not quite deontology, but it does, I think, very well what it's meant to do, and it works like a theorem. So a theorem doesn't really tell you a theorem in mathematics, right? We call them theorems, but if we don't know if it's axiomatized, what does that mean? But it's because we have a proof for it. But I digress. The idea is to describe a state of ethics. We don't try to define the whole metaphysical thing. What we try to do is state necessary conditions for, in this universe, a physical instantiation of the phenomenon. So it's not a metaphysical theory of ethics, and it's not even a claim of the ultimate definition of ethics. We should have a video on it sometime, shouldn't we, guys?
I actually had legitimately been like talking to Wes about this idea, and we.
It's just I don't know if I should publish the paper. I don't know if I should publish the paper first and discuss it now. I'm not sure of the order, because the publication process through academia will take like at least a year and a half, right? So like I don't, and furthermore, I don't know how deep I can dive into the axiomatization, right, and the mathematical modeling, because it turns into like a state vector with probability amplitudes that you then take an inner product with to determine the probability of a particular state that we're interested in for the theory.
Chris, the only thing I'm interested in is if I have the train, if I'm at the train track and there's
it does
trolley
deal with trolley. It does it very well.
And there's trolleys. Should I kill Nana or that bus of kids? I'm not.
Yeah, that's a good.
So here's one thing the theory. Here's one thing the theory actually brilliantly, I think, explains: is some situations there's no ethical solution possible. Right. So it's in an ethical situation. So a situation is defined as ethical. It is a relation between applicable moral agents, not a person. So it's a different flavor. But notice that these are axioms, and so I make no pretentious claims that these axioms can't be contested, right? As any axioms could, but from what I've found thus far, when I apply this theorem consistently, it does very well what it was meant to do. I don't have to add ad hoc adjustments to the theory.
That's that's nice.
But for me to actually give you a demonstration of how it applies, I would have to explain it, because otherwise it's like because otherwise it's hard to know what to criticize. So if I told you the area of a triangle is not necessarily determined by, or better yet, if I told you the interior sum of the angles of a triangle is not necessarily pi radians or 180 degrees, right? If you didn't understand non-Euclidean geometry, then clearly you might contest the claim.
You know what? I think we should have an entire show of me asking Chris questions and him responding. This is like really complicated, and I'm gonna have to like do that's like the whole episode with me just asking him stupid questions like that.
Andy, if it helps, I often go to have it laid out after these things.
Okay.
Let's see. So we've got laughs in Spanish Inquisition. Under the post from Duncan, I believe is talking about gang. Could be wrong. And then, wrong. That is a lie. I did not draw. Of course, I'm lying. You are innocent, and you are on your vessel of truth, and I'm on my sea of ignorance. Please throw me a life raft. I'm just kidding. I don't know. Maybe I am. I don't know.
So, I find it so much more reassuring when people say things like, I don't know, because it's honest, and like the people who I find that are too sure about things are the ones that worry me more.
People are very good at finding what they're looking for,
and
convincing themselves that the process from which they found it was reasoning. I don't think people understand like real rigor behind a proof. You're not allowed to make any inference without rigorous justification. And even then, notice that with what I've said, we still find fault, right? We find reason to be suspicious. That doesn't mean we shouldn't, of course. I'm not saying that. And it doesn't mean that perhaps we can't remedy those constraints of discrete systems. You see, the idea is if I can use a continuous system of logic to infer that. So here's the idea. Did you notice that we use the discreteness of the axioms for our system to find something of an exception, right? Through diagonalization. Now here's the idea. And this is not the proof. This is just so people who are non-mathematicians or logicians can conceptualize. In a continuous system, there would always be a between, just like on a real number line, any two axioms. So you couldn't diagonalize to find an exception. And if you can show that a discrete system is a subsystem of a continuous system, well, now we're in business. Right? Because then Gödel's theorems would be correct. You can't show that with discrete systems, but it's not a statement about logic in its totality. And so it's possible years of research. No, it's not. It's fair. It's called a proof of existence. That's an indirect proof of existence. Now, constructionalists won't like it.
Smarter people.
Constructionalists won't like it because there are some subsets of mathematicians that prefer direct proofs. E.g., they don't like when you argue something for contradiction, right? However, they at the same time have difficulty addressing for a statement P how P could be said to be the double negation of another. They claim that that's not the same, but in some instances it's not clear. Notice that they're relying on the very inferences they criticize in that regard. That is to say, if you're arguing P implies Q, right? Are you not arguing the contraposition? Not Q implies not P. And so it's very difficult to argue, and it's very hard to really say this is my hill, I'm going to die on it, right? I mean, you could say that, but if you're being genuine in the discourse, I don't know. But I hope anyone watching, we've got 7 people. Anyone have any questions for Andy?
Yeah, fine.
I mean, obviously, I think I implicitly implied a question there, but it wasn't directed towards him. Because some people have asked, like, are there any questions? And I usually say to them, I think you've answered your question, but I hope I didn't do something like that just now or just a moment ago.
Got a very unique set of challenging conditions that we work under.
I'm like a hindrance to productive conversations, possibly, right? Like.
Yeah, but it's such a brilliant hindrance. I love it. It's like we need more of that, because it's like the reason why it's hindering the discussion is because it's actually making sure what the discussion is actually about. Like when we did that thing on abortion the other day, I had like a whole list of points that I have for when I made my pros and cons about abortion, and I pulled out the first one, and it happened to be a really curly one, and the rest of those just sat on the next to me for the rest of the show as we just discussed what is personhood, which is a brilliant question and something that's very hard to.
Well, it won't be our first discussion. That's what I think people in the comments who have complaints about you didn't address that, you didn't address this. It will probably be one of many videos, including this. Andy, you're welcome to come on anytime you want. Not literally anytime, because maybe I'll be dead sometime.
Sure. Well, I'll sign point to me being dead before you. So yeah,
I don't know. Duncan might have alternative plans for me.
Okay, very good.
But I think that what occurred here, kind of in a way, motivates the question further. Are we digging our own graves? And that did I handle? Did I handle very well his line of inquiry? If it was even a line of inquiry, I don't know. Can it be handled well? Right? Maybe the very posing of the question is only applicable to a certain domain.
It was very much a bit of a trap question because it didn't really allow you much of a way out of it. And as you said before, you tried to go one of the two avenues that you can go out of it.
Well, as I told you, it appeared to be a trap question. But if you redefine your system of logic, no, I've got a whole uncountable range of truth values to choose from. Okay,
look,
he did not understand that. However, I'll tell you that right now.
Well, one of my many shitty rhetorical tricks I do is to ask, specifically do the black and white fallacy. It's like, this is a yes or no question. Why don't you answer the yes or no question in a yes or no way? And the other person tries to use logic and stuff and say it isn't just a yes or no question. Got a vibe for that.
I mean, we're fools together, Duncan.
I wasn't sure if he was meaning to troll or anything, but he was asking whether we assert something. And I think that's problematic right there, is we're not trying to assert anything on the show.
Yeah, but they're trying very hard not to assert anything.
Yeah.
It's kind of a
things.
I don't know. I wouldn't say that, because I think there's an operative contradiction there.
I wouldn't say that because I made an assertion.
Right. I don't know.
So he could prove us wrong.
Right. But
so we weren't trying to, at least I wasn't going to gag you for that. I mean, it's just he didn't seem to want to take I don't know for an answer.
I think the problem, Duncan, is I raised, I think, very fair points. And I wasn't even given time to raise as many points, to be honest, for any particular point that you had that I wished. Which told me that you weren't really interested in saying, let's look at this, let's unpack it. You were like, this, right? It was more like, let me get to where I want to go. Stop interrupting me and just agree with me, right? It was the very question seemed like you wanted me to already give you an assumed conclusion.
Let's try to pull 2 points together, or at least two ideas together about how to communicate with people, period, online, and how to communicate with people about religion. And definitely doing these kind of truncated quick questions in one after another isn't gonna get you a lot of friends and influence a lot of people, basically.
No,
I don't know.
It just isn't. I mean, and that's it, and that's fine. If you don't know, you don't know. But if you go down to the local coffee house or to a pub and you just rapid fire questions to someone in this manner, I don't know, you're probably not going to be voted most popular or get your point across.
Well, I think what's happening is that abortion video, many post comments. Yeah, it did, didn't it? Get the popcorn out for those comments.
Yeah.
So which one of you guys like baby killing? I mean,
I'm sorry.
Are we talking about?
Apparently, I'm the one that's primarily accused of.
Yeah, the clown host.
Skewing the discussion in favor of one. So he got it. Yeah.
So you're the baby killer then, Chris, out of all of us.
Yeah.
I think so. I mean, but actually, on the subject really quickly, I have heard some very interesting medical information, which is that sometimes in the case of pregnancies where the mother's in danger, you actually don't want to have to perform a non-chemical abortion because you have to dilate cervix, and that will take sometimes 24 hours. You don't want a rapid dilation due to blood pressure constraints. So sometimes it's actually easier to do a cesarean and deliver the baby. And, so it's easy for us to sit here. And I guess what I'm trying to say is I don't think it's as simple as it should never be done or it should always be done. I think that people are deluding themselves if they're saying it's that simple. I think that people are not, it seems to me, interested in having a genuine discourse about this and religion. Sometimes they're interested in arriving at their conclusion. It's
Well, that's most people most of the time about most issues. I don't want to sound cynical about that, but
yeah, this is true. This is why I've always felt like the world could do with a little bit more critical thinking.
All right, so he'd like to know who I am. Could we have a quick intro rundown? I don't know, Dunk. All right, so I'm Christopher Robert Stum. I'm currently an undergraduate student majoring in mathematics at UNC. I also do a little bit of theoretical physics and formal logic. I hope to get a PhD in the aforementioned subject, and I think is that sufficient? I don't know. I mean, I try not to emphasize credentials because I'm more interested in. It's not that credentials aren't important. It's just that I found that it's hard to argue that they're either sufficient or sometimes necessary conditions.
You don't want to fall into the argument from authority kind of stuff.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
But I'm sorry, Duncan, if you feel that way.
So now we're talking about credentials. We're talking about Wes. So what are you all about, Wes?
I don't have any credentials. I tried to go to college, but I flunked out. So I tried to go back, and I flunked out again. But I was bipolar, and still bipolar, of course. But
okay, yeah.
So
daily atheist, are you asking me that question? Sorry, Wes, go ahead.
Yeah, but anyway, I've been in bipolar and disability for years because I couldn't finish college or anything and couldn't work. So now I'm trying to do this so I can do something I like to do, raise questions, talk about things in an open conversation that we can maybe not always answer, but come at problems more honestly and openly.
Right.
So, and educate ourselves. So.
Cool.
If the question is designated towards me,
hey, we're not done with intros yet, Chris. Duncan, what's your credentials? Okay. Besides being Australian, Duncan, what are you?
So in Australia, I'm also into poetry and writing. I've only been doing this a little bit, so I'm very, very new, but I'm kind of enjoying getting into this and meeting new people. And because as an Australian, kind of a little bit isolated over here in like a community of the rest of the world. So this is kind of like a great little window to the rest of the world for me, where I can sort of wave and people say hi and stuff.
So I reached out to Duncan and Wes precisely because I wasn't interested in their credentials. I like to look at the way people think, and I think I'm very attentive to the when I listen to what people say. I try to convert it into a syllogistic propositional logic form. So not in English,
sir,
but in...
That is clear. That is, you're not telling us anything new with this, brother.
I've noticed that these two, and it seems you as well, although I haven't seen enough of your blog to discern that, but these two, they don't seem to be interested, at least for now. Maybe they were different back then. People can possibly change, but they're more interested in having a dialogue and being shown wrong. And, and it was for those reasons that I thought these would be good co-hosts, So I don't want my own channel because I also don't want to dominate. I don't know if I'm competent enough to answer questions sufficiently. I would rather have a symposium through which to discuss things with people.
Yeah. And I think it's
I don't know.
All three of us as well. So sort of quite fortuitous that it all sort of panned out that way.
The client has a good point there. And that's why I say secular a lot of times. And I always say agnostic.
I will say that I use the word atheist specifically because there's been research that shows that people have less stigma against a certain group if they personally know a member from that group. So by saying that I am an atheist to people, that at least potentially lessens the stigma that person feels towards me and towards my group. So that's what I do. And to tell you the truth, it's easy for me because I'm an old white guy and I'm tall and I have gray hair and I can just exercise my privilege by saying I'm an atheist. But for people who don't find it that easy, I try to push the envelope.
Make it easier for them. Yeah, if I don't. Yep, I get that. I do the same thing with being bipolar as well. I'm very open about my bipolar.
I think the term the term perhaps could use further specificity, because I think we agree there are different ways to be atheist, right? For example, you can be
100%.
you can not be aware of the existence of a set of like traits that could be put together to ascribe to some hypothetical being, right?
Sure.
Which you don't functionally believe, therefore, but you're not aware that it's even an option of belief, right?
Right.
But then there's also there is a thing there that you may or may not be aware of that you're like, I don't think that's true. And then so it's like, it seems that the term itself is sufficiently nebulous that it allows for variance within the community.
Yeah.
But it also allows for the illusion of, I have an idea of precisely what you think.
Yeah.
Right.
It's kind of funny because I was actually talking to a friend today about it, and he was saying like about how he didn't really define himself as atheist, and I was like, but you totally are an atheist though. And it was like, do you believe in God? He's like, no. I'm like, well, yeah, we've sort of been done here now. But not saying I'm not talking to him, just saying like, I've just proved that you're an atheist. But I said, there's so many people in the world who actually don't even realize that they're an atheist, or there's an agnostic atheist and all those different variations, that they're just going about just living their life, just not believing in God, but not realizing there's a name for that.
Right.
Or just not even a God, about, whether there's a teacup floating in space. But of course, the term theist wouldn't then be what you would say, right? You would say a something, right? But I think that I don't know what set of parameters are pertinent to the discussion, but I think we have to try to refrain from convincing ourselves that we have answers to questions that if we really approach the dialogue honestly, it's very hard to argue we do.
What I always say, what I tell people, so this is how the conversations usually go. Hi, we start talking, I say I'm an atheist, and then usually one or two things either happen. They typically go, oh, okay, and they go on from there. Or we go further into the conversation and get into more specifics.
Yes. Yeah. So I guess the question is it potentially problematic to label oneself? Because I've noticed that, at my school, there were a group of leftist individuals, and it was actually at an event where there was it was a pro-life, argument position, and they had all these pictures of babies being killed, and they came and they wanted to shut down any possibility of discussion. They didn't even want to talk to them about it. Just said the very fact that you're on campus is I don't know if this is true what they said. I believe all I think is what I heard, and I don't even know if it's. I don't want to say the names because some of them are people at my school, and I don't want to but maybe I misheard. I think I have a pretty good memory. I don't think that's true. But if it is, I apologize for straw manning these people. But there were statements about, that there was no productivity in discussing it. And when I put two of them together and I said, okay, you guys you're in this together, right? You both agree that you're pro-choice, and so you guys are on this side, right? And then what I did is I took a piece of paper for each of them, and I wrote down, okay, I gave a situation with very precise details and asked each of them not to talk, but to go and write what they would say about that situation, and then to tell me what a person who disagrees with them, what that kind of person would be. Yeah. They did so, and when I put them back together, I'm like, well, it seems here that you guys actually don't agree on much about how to handle this situation. And furthermore, each of you, at least one of them, not both of them, but one of them, if I remember correctly, said a person who disagrees with me would be a bigot. So I'm like, so you guys now think so this person is now a bigot?
Oh.
And so what I worry is sometimes people, when they group themselves, assume that therefore they think more similar than perhaps they actually do. Like, how difficult would it be for us to get each other to agree on what we wanted for dinner tonight? Like, what is the probability that if I ask, okay, what do you guys think we should, not even dinner, just like, I think I don't know. It's not the only factor, but it is a concern, is that if and when we group people by, I'm on the left, I'm an atheist, I'm this, I'm that, people.
This is what I'm saying. I know that Wes is a bigot if he doesn't like my choice of pizza. Right here.
Yeah, that's definitely.
You don't put pineapple on, do you?
But the thing is, though, I'm gonna do Christopher's job for a second, right? Because yes, there are potential negatives to labeling yourself, but also there are potential positives, as Andy just mentioned before. So then you have to try and figure out whether they outweigh the negatives and the positives. Yeah. Sometimes I think certain circumstances maybe it's wise not to say,
and I hope what I said,
I'm an atheist, and then other times it's good to actually promote
and
that.
I hope it was clear that when I asked the question, was it a problem, I was kind of conceding that point, that there exist boundary conditions, right? Because why would I ask the question unless rhetorically, if I have exceptions? It's clear that, as you aptly pointed out, I'm not saying that therefore it's necessarily a problem. There are benefits to doing so. For example, look at a number system. If it's binary, then the length of the number of digits required to represent a number will grow fast, right? But here's like the way that it's actually an interesting analogy is that if you have a 10-base number system, the task before mathematicians was they understood beyond reasonable doubt that there were uncountably many numbers, but they didn't want that many symbols to represent them. That would be a disaster, right? Like if there was a different symbol to represent every single number, oh my goodness, so they figured out that, well, all right, we don't need to do that. All we need is a set of a countable base of symbols whose placement then tells us the identity of the number, right? And so, if we have 10 symbols, then that's a base 10. There are 10 symbols, and the ordering of those symbols tells us the value of the number, right? So in binary, there's just two symbols. It means, 1, 0, and 1. Yeah. And so then when I move the 1, when I have 1, 0, I'm saying there are 0 1s and there's 1, 2, right? And so that's the number 2. But notice that the trade-off there is it'll grow fast in terms of written form, but there were fewer symbols memorized, right? And so conversely, if you have more symbols, the numbers become shorter, but you've got to memorize more. So there are trade-offs, right? And so in this sense, it's like grouping ourselves may have a similar relation, right? Where it's like we optimize some parameters and compromise others.
Sure.
Yeah. Fair enough. That was a very roundabout way to make actually a very good point. I actually followed it and I got there. I understand where you're going from. Excellent.
Yeah.
Before I think we're touch on groupthink again. I think that's a really good point to be careful of what groupthinks how you categorize yourself, as Christopher was saying, because you get into those groupthings of I'm an atheist, liberal, and we all think like this, when a lot of those things are really not. Just because I'm a Democrat and liberal doesn't necessarily tell my position on any particular topic. I can have.
I do find it eerily suspicious. I do find it eerily suspicious if and when I can ask a person a political group they believe they're a member of, and then predict with like a sufficient degree of confidence, okay, so you think this, that, and this. That is disturbing to me. Because if you actually peel apart the logic, it is actually very hard to argue from this seemingly isolated premise that this thing should follow. And that's usually very eerie to me. That usually tells me perhaps that this person hasn't really thought this through.
Well, we're not. Overall, basically, most of us aren't rational creatures to begin with.
No.
I don't know. No. I think you might be right.
Your frontal lobes are just these rationalization chambers of just being able to say words that the lower processes kind of create. Not Christopher.
I don't know, because like I've said on a previous show, there is a conjecture that I've discussed with some like string theorists that I'm acquainted with in my department about consciousness, like an instantiated theory. And the idea is what it would fundamentally come down to is like, it's not that a brain is consciousness or even thinking, but rather it's what it does in the system, right? Because you can obviously do things to a brain that then make it a brain. Like you don't want to conflate a plane with the phenomenon of flight, but it could achieve the phenomenon, right? But it is
Say that again.
You don't want to conflate a plane with the phenomenon of flight.
Sure.
But it doesn't mean that they're not related, right? So the question is it a phenomenon that the brain may be a factor in the relation of? And the idea would be that what it would come down to is that if you take the systems of equations that predict integrated information processing and instantiate them in our universe, those would have predictions on how the gravity fields, the Higgs field, the electromagnetic field.
So let me just try to understand this. What you're not saying is that though the brain isn't consciousness, brain creates consciousness, though. Are you saying?
I don't know. It's not. It can't just be the brain because it's what it does in the system. Put it in a vacuum.
The people that you talk to, would they agree with that the brain creates consciousness?
No.
Because that sounds like substantial dualism.
No.
Yeah.
Because we put a brain in a vacuum of space, right? It's a relation, but it's like biconditional between the system and the brain. It's not just the brain. And so let me just explain what I'm going, and maybe the picture would be clear. Okay. So if a brain does something that if you take a system of equations descriptive of integrated information processing and you instantiate those in space-time, what you should have then is a very clear picture of, if you take the union of all the physics fields, the Higgs field, the gravity field, the electromagnetic field, right, of the information flow. And what it would actually potentially show is that consciousness and thinking come down to certain types of integrated information processes and how information is bent on itself. Do you necessarily need a brain to do that? Maybe not.
So let me say this, because you would just because if there's a factory, right, that creates cars, right, the factory has to interact with things outside of it to get the basic materials to make cars.
But it's also composed of things itself, perhaps.
Right. So the brain. So this is something that a metaphor that they would not agree with, is that the brain is pretty much the factory churning out consciousness from what is in the world.
It's more complex than that. You may not. What I'm saying is, if you look at the systems of equations and you try to take a more imaginative approach, there's nothing in the equations to insist that you need a brain necessarily. We don't know. That? Yeah.
A way that sort of shows, I don't know, a possible example or analogy or something to help with this about the brain. It's also the processes as well as the brain that makes things happen.
It's like, what you're saying before, only a plane fly?
Yeah, but what I'm saying before that is like,
right.
Here, let me finish this. It's a kind of strange thought, but let me get there. Okay, so you're saying that the brain, if I'm thinking the word apple, the neurons that fire in my head are a different combination to the neurons that would fire in your head if you thought apple. So therefore, we can't take that. Right. So we can't take those pulses and put them into my head and get. I couldn't get your apple impulses and put it into my head, and it would be an apple. It would be something else. It would be an orange or something.
We have similar neural mappings, but what I'm trying to say, generalize it. Okay.
Yeah.
It may be down to how information in space-time is bent on itself, and what consciousness may actually be is just how information is curved. It's a shape to space-time. Is what I'm trying to tell you. And that eventually we should be able to take a partition of space-time and an information and memory field, if you will, meaning the union of all physics fields, and look at the shape of that. And certain shapes will have like a certain integrated distortion pattern that this is thinking, this is consciousness. And so it's complicated and very abstract, but in other words, and notice this isn't a metaphysical theory of consciousness. It's more of an instantiated, if these are laws of physics, and there's tons of axioms underlying it. And it's also an open conjecture. We don't know, but it's a very interesting possibility in that it's not. I am answer what consciousness is simply because you're going to inevitably get into some axioms of philosophy and mathematics there. I don't know if you can. It's kind of like trying to understand.
My brother's in the field, and he also doesn't know about the whole thing.
Right. I don't think.
My brother's a psychologist and done brain mapping with for post-traumatic stress disorder, and he's also been into the field of telling you that he doesn't know all the shit that the brain does, because it's
and it may, like I said, it may be because it comes down to how information is, and that's not to say that is consciousness either, right? It's just this is instantiated consciousness. It's a slightly different thing to say. Mm-hmm. So really, what they would be saying is that if and when there's consciousness, we would predict these things would be present for some set of laws of physics would be the conjecture, but it's just that, it's conjecture. We don't know. But it would be a far clearer way to define it if it could be done, because then we could literally start to set up apparatuses and see if we could actually instantiate a thing that is conscious without a brain.
Let me ask you another question. So you're saying that, or the idea is, for example, because if it's an interesting idea and one that I think it just comes to me as bunky, if that's a word, bunky, that a rock, just because the rock interacts or does some kind of let me continue my stupid analogy. So because the rock, or let's say a thermometer responds I'll show how old I am. Let's say the mercury in the thermometer reacts to the temperature. Does that mean the apparatus is conscious?
No, that's not what I'm saying at all. Some things may not have the inherent molecular chemistry to instantiate those equations.
Mm-hmm.
Meaning the conjecture is that those kinds of things cannot have that information distortion. It's not saying that everything can have can necessarily be conscious, but it's also, it does, as perhaps you're asking, imply gradations, right?
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Of integrated information processing, but it's so really, to get what I'm trying to say, you have to think in terms of the mathematics. Have you ever seen like a slope field or something, like a meteorological mapping of like tons of arrows?
Yep.
What I'm trying to say is it would make more sense to look at how is the information flowing, and is the pattern of information flow sufficiently integrated in such a manner that it conforms to these equations that are predictive of integrated information processing that's deeper than just action, reaction, cause, effect.
Does it have to flow back and forth to really be consciousness? Or
when I say information flow, right, I'm not just talking about like quarks and leptons, but also like the shape of space-time due to Einstein's relativity. I'm talking about it's complicated. We'd have to have a whole video to dive into general and special relativity and to really map this out without doing it in a way that was disingenuous.
Okay. Could be an option for one at some point.
So you're saying a really complicated thermometer would do this?
I don't know.
It's not
I'm just fucking with you. That's all. I mean,
but what I am saying is that,
by the way, that was a joke.
I conjecture that if and when there's, if and when there's some kind of relation between, the physical system and thought, that the laws of physics should have predictive shapes in space-time of information flow, and if the phenomenology of thinking is sufficiently well defined that there is at least a common denominator of uniqueness, we can pinpoint it and say this is the shape to thinking in space-time. This is the flow of information that defines certain types of thinking. So it's clearly a conjecture, and it should be treated as such.
Yeah, sure, I understand that. It's a Star Trek episode. I got you.
Yeah. But
really complicated one with maths and stuff like that.
But but fundamentally, it's still it's a conjecture. You can put all the math behind it you want, but
sure.
it's we need.
It's
kind of like
the data. Sorry.
I'm sorry.
I'm just putting you as most likely candidate to be the android on the group. Don't mind me.
But it's kind of like other conjectures where we have like a conjecture about testing for the continuity of space-time, right? And we shouldn't really use terms like continuity because those in mathematics are reserved usually for functions. But the Star Trek, let's see. I just want to keep up the tongue. So it's kind of like to test for the continuity of space-time. What we mean by that would be that this is off topic. We can discuss that later too. It's starting to get off topic. It's a problem I think I have.
I think the important thing is if we have 1 million thermometers grouped together in a room, typing blindly, we're going to get Shakespeare.
No, that's not. That wouldn't follow, because you still you have to have a fundamentally different. That's like saying if I have 1 million atoms of some type, that I will necessarily get the same chemical reaction as another chemical composition. That doesn't follow at all. But
it doesn't follow at all.
Right.
I totally agree with it.
But
it could be interesting.
I don't know.
How do thermometers type? That's a very good question, Book of Linus.
He was being,
I am curious about your stepfather, who describes himself as a spiritual atheist. What does he mean by that?
Oh yeah, that's right.
I think Sam Harris would call himself a spiritual atheist. Am I wrong on that, guys? Or
yeah,
I
with Sam, definitely.
Yeah,
I don't know. We just talked about this in Facebook group the other day, and we didn't really get a clear answer. I've had Muslim tell me one time that I was very spiritual. And I thought, okay, you pray 3 times a day and all this stuff. And
5. They pray 5 times a day.
Oh, yeah, 5 times. 5 times a day. And I guess I was meditating at the time, so I don't know if it's because I meditated like an hour a day. So
cool.
Yeah.
How can a thermometer
another time?
But she's joking. She gets that
Yeah.
you joke.
Yeah.
Linus is pretty sharp. She's pretty sharp.
Yeah.
But anyway, I've wondered since then.
I
I'm
can picture it.
going to have to
That's
talk
awesome.
to him again to find out what he meant, because some people have said the same thing to me, and I don't know why they think I'm a spiritual person. If it's vibes I'm giving off or energy.
I think it's also partly because, as you said before, with the meditation, that would be part of the thing, but also because you are very empathetic, and so that a lot of people assume that to be a spiritualist, and so if you're kind and you care about other people, people are like, oh, that's spiritual. It's like, oh, just trying to be a dick all the time.
Yeah.
So her
conjecture, but it's said differently.
Her conjecture is that he has a strong dislike for Christian faith dogma, but feels there is some sort of agnostic spiritual nature out there.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
See you later, Chris.
Take care.
Take care.
Okay.
Nice seeing you again.
Thank you.
I mean, it's strange, isn't it? Because such a claim is also rather nebulous, right?
Yeah.
But it's sufficiently nebulous that it's like
it could make sense.
So here's something I'd like to unpack, because I've often thought about this. Is a problem with faith is if faith is in opposition to knowledge, where if we argue that knowledge, if possible, is certainty, right, at the supremum of knowledge, and faith seems juxtaposed to that for fixing a dimension. I'm not talking about meaning for a fixed entity X, for which this is an applicable set of properties to discuss. Okay. Because you could possibly know X but have faith in Y. I'm talking about for a fixed X, for which both of these properties are applicable, if applicable. If faith is in opposition to knowledge, then as you increase the degree of faith for an entity, do you not lose precision and the ability to then define exactly what you have faith in?
Somewhat, because I mean, when they get really devout, they often say like he moves in mysterious ways, and when he says something when he does something that they don't understand.
Well, the reason I asked him, could he distinguish, for example, Duncan atheist or atheist Duncan, whichever it was. I think it was Duncan atheist. The reason I inquired as to whether he could distinguish the concept from the entity is because sometimes if you have sufficient faith, the terms become so nebulous that you could actually safely remove the thing that the person initially had faith in, replace something else, and they may not even notice. Right, so it's like what I'm trying to say is faith may not be unique to just religion.
It's quite possible that the book Linus's father is like that. It's quite possible that like he has that faith in something, but just no idea what that faith is in. So he's super agnostic and, but spiritual in that regard. That he believes in something, just there's something out there and can't explain it. That could be a possibility too.
You had something to say, Andy?
Yes, sir.
I was agreeing with you, Chris.
I don't know.
That you can have faith in something that's not religious. I mean, certainly,
Yeah.
That's if you're defining faith as something that just is unsubstantiated with facts. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff out there that's not religious. That's just hokum that people have faith in. You don't have to believe in an all-powerful deity to believe in homeopathy, for example.
Yeah.
What I find is interesting about that is then if faith isn't unique to religion, right, then where exactly is the appeal? It's not that there couldn't be an appeal, obviously. I mean,
I'll tell you where the appeal. At least I'll tell you what I think the appeal is because we're a bunch of overall monkeys, and I think we could say that.
You mean apes, right?
Apes, right.
How far you want to go back?
So we're going to talk about we're a bunch of apes, and so I think this whole faith and ape and primate hierarchies.
Yeah.
Something about that makes this whole, especially for monotheism, makes it really like a dark gravity in our psyches. It just pulls down to us, pulls a lot of different processes to it.
Because a lot of people appeal to intuition, right? They'll say like, not a lot, shall we say a subset of individuals perhaps appeal to intuition. But my first question—
Can we have a subset that's the majority?
I don't. Yeah, it's possible, but
I feel comfortable with that.
But it's safer to say a subset just logically, right? Because it's easier to defend.
But
so in other words,
like a subset of 95%. That's all.
so here's what I'm saying logically. Okay, if there are 7 people in a room and I say 2 people are in this room, it's still true. Because I didn't say 2 and only 2. I said 2 people, right? So it's enough that if I choose a weaker statement, it can still allow for the truth of the harder statement to prove. Yeah. But it's just putting a stake in the ground somewhere, you know? And so that's often why I choose some subset. As long as it's not empty, I guess I should technically, because notice that if I didn't even say the set was not empty, right? Because if you wanted to say because then notice that if someone then says, "Oh, I disagree," well, I didn't say the set had to be not empty now, did I? Right? So it's like it's a really general claim.
Well, it's like
I told you he did it to himself too. Remember I said at the very start, he does it to himself too. Like an hour into it, it's all become clear, hasn't it?
Yeah.
Well, there's a Simpson joke that was in one of the episodes about recycling, and Lisa was talking to this pitch person, this businesswoman, and she goes, and they were talking about recycling. It's like, well, what percent of this is recycled? And the woman goes, 0. That's a percent.
I mean,
Guys, I'm gonna have to get going in a couple of minutes.
Yeah, it's been great having you on. We can end the broadcast now if it pleases you. I've enjoyed it. I hope you have as well. And
I've had a great time. I've earned the fun. That's what I do.
Yeah, I hope so. And anyone watching this, if you've gotten this far, congratulations. You've made it through the long night.
You got an award coming to you.
But if you want to actually watching us retroactively participate on, one of our next, I call them discussions, not really even podcasts, just feel free to tune in. Our next airing is this Friday, the 9th at 3:00 p.m. Eastern time. I'll be discussing the book, The Sellout, and its ethical and political implications with a literary analyst from UNC Chapel Hill, going for his PhD in the subject. So, we're happy to conclude here. And thank you, Andy, for coming on board.
I had a great time, guys. Thanks for having me.
Yes.
All right. So I'm going to end the broadcast.